I am so excited to be interviewing Jeffrey Smith, who's the author of a book that I just love, Seeds of Deception, and also a movie that I really, really want all of you to see. It's called Secret Ingredients, and you can see it at secretingredients.com. This is
It's actually
one of the most important things.
It's actually secretingredientsmovie.com.
Okay, secretingredientsmovie.com. Okay. And this is one of the most important movies you can watch. It's got five families who are really ill, and it shows what happens as they start to understand what they've been doing to their body. So, Jeffrey, I'd love to hear about how did this come about?
Well, my focus has been on GMOs, and GMOs also are sprayed with Roundup herbicides. So I've become knowledgeable about the health dangers of both. And people used to tell me as I traveled around the world speaking, they'd say, I could tell the difference if I eat a GMO. And I was embarrassed to say it now that I was skeptical, even though I was like reporting on rats that had massive damage in just 10 days on a GMO diet. People were saying they could notice a difference, and I didn't really believe them because I was just thinking it would be some kind of subtle change in the epidemiological measurements of some diseases that are related. But I started to educate physicians and speak about all the documented health risks to physicians' conferences. And they started to prescribe non-GMO diets. And then I started interviewing the doctors, and then I believed what people were telling me because the doctors were saying absolutely remarkable improvements, absolutely predictable, consistent, and dramatic and quick when people go on a non-GMO and organic diet. So I put out an earlier movie called Genetic Roulette and started giving lectures, and this was in 2012. And people started telling me, I'm changing my diet and I'm feeling better. So I decided to risk asking people at the lectures I was giving and say, okay, how many people noticed a change when they switched? A bunch of hands go up. So I said, okay, what'd you notice? And then I said, how many other people noticed it? And I understood that there was a pattern emerging in lecture after lecture, whether it was to individuals or to physicians talking about their patients. It was always the same thing. That digestive disorders was always number one. Brain fog and fatigue, number two. Then there was weight loss, anxiety, depression, food sensitivity, down to autism and diabetes. People were getting better from kidney diseases and liver problems, and skin conditions were coming up constantly, and chronic pain. So we surveyed, after about 150 lectures, we surveyed 3,256 people, and they got better from the same conditions and the same relative frequency. But I realized I need to start reporting on these individuals because that would be more convincing when people see someone on the screen who'd had a problem, switched to organic, and the problem went away. So my filmmaking partner, Amy Hart, and I went to a chiropractic conference, and I announced in my lecture, if anyone wants to be interviewed, come see us. And she's a filmmaker, and I've made some films. And so the first person to come to the hotel room to be interviewed was Kathleen DiChiara, who described that her family had 21 chronic conditions between the five of them. She was paralyzed, chronic pain, all these problems. Her son had autism, her husband, a breast tumor, another son, eczema, another one, mood and digestive disorders. And she was trying different things and trying gluten-free and this and that. And as she did these various changes, she'd see improvements, but they were still managing the conditions. When they switched to organic and got rid of the GMOs and the Roundup as a result, the problems went away. The autistic son at the time, he was still diagnosed as autistic, but he was as if completely better.
I know.
And so it was like, Amy said to me, we have our film, let's just go to there. And I said, okay, there's people lined up in the hall, let's talk to them. The next person to come in, Dr. Marcia Schaefer, she's a chiropractor. She had a clinic, and she focuses a lot on infertile couples and getting them healthy, and she puts them all in an organic diet. And as you'll see in the film, in Secret Ingredients, by the end, 92 out of 92 infertile couples that went to her all have children, all were switched to an organic diet. And the ones that did not have children were the ones that did not follow the protocol. So this is how it came. Just like I started to believe it. We got the evidence, and then we found Kathleen and Marcia, and then others and others, and the stories are simply breathtaking.
Yeah, I was blown away by that first family. I mean, that, you know, you show that autistic child and how low functioning he is. He's chewing on his jacket, and then you show him afterwards with his friends and talking and interacting. It was just like night and day. It was just so amazing.
Yeah, that's actually something that I've seen before. I've interviewed someone that for someone else's film that never got made, but she was saying, well, my autistic son is 80% better. And people said, oh, great. Why? Well, he's gluten-free and dairy-free, and we're having about 80% of organic food. So she told the next person, gluten-free, dairy-free, and 80% organic food. Gluten-free, dairy-free, 80% better, 80% organic food. Oh my God. The alarm went off. She switched to 100%, right. And she said she closed the gap. And then, right. So I've actually heard it many times of parents of autistic kids, but not just that. We now have evidence of pets being switched to organic food, and they get better for many of the same conditions. Right. Livestock switched to non-GMO, they get better. Even the animal feeding studies where they force feed GMOs and Roundup to these animals, they suffer from the precursors of many of these same conditions that people and animals get better from when they're switched to organic or non-GMO.
Yeah, so I've got a little story about that. We had a golden retriever puppy,
oh, nice.
And he started having diarrhea and throwing up, and he couldn't keep his food down. He was 6 months old, and the doctors, you know, they wanted to do surgery and this and that. Well, fortunately, the pet trainer said, put him on an organic raw food diet. Within 2 meals.
Oh, man.
The dog was completely healthy. After that, just 2 meals. It was like magic. And so, of course, since then, all of our dogs have been on the raw organic food. That's their natural diet, of course.
So when was this? What year was this?
This was, let's see, it was probably about 15, 16 years ago.
All right, so GMOs,
quite a while ago.
GMOs were introduced in 23 years ago. And when they were introduced, Dr. Michael Fox, who's the veterinarian that wrote the syndicated column Animal Doctor, it was all over the country, 25 to 30 million readers. He started getting all these letters from readers saying, my dog is vomiting or has diarrhea or itching or allergies.
Right.
And he wrote back individually by hand, put him on an organic, or take him off the GMOs. That was what he said. Take him off the GMOs, and here's how. He said he filled a file drawer with people who said it worked. And
yeah, one of my clients had a Great Dane who she adored. And Great Danes don't generally live that long. This dog was 8 years old and had cancer. And she was just devastated. And I said, look, put him on an organic raw food diet. He got better and lived 3 more years, which is really old for a Great Dane.
I know. We had one too. And I interview, as part of our work, we have a website called petsandgmos.com. And I interviewed Dr. Barbara Royal, who's Oprah Winfrey's veterinarian. She said that the first thing she does now, after discovering the link between GMOs, Roundup, and these diseases, she puts them on a healthy diet, almost no matter what. I mean, obviously there's a broken bone to fix it. But she says that she puts the dog or cat on a good diet, and then they come back a few weeks later. She says that 80 or 90% are either managing or completely healed. Like 40% completely healed, another 40, 50% managing, and only 10 or 20% are not converted because of this. So you can imagine what a toll it's taking on the animals. And now think about us. If you track more than 30 diseases in the United States, they rise in parallel with the increased use of GMOs and Roundup. That's in the film as well. And we don't think it's a coincidence.
Oh, no, it's not a coincidence. One day I took 2 of my dogs into the vet, and they were like 8 years old. And the vet said, well, it's time to take x-rays because, you know, by the time they're 8, they have arthritis. And I said, no, our dogs don't have arthritis. She says, well, of course they do. I said, no, they don't. You can go x-ray them. She x-rayed them, no arthritis. And she says, well, what are you doing? I said, well, they're on an organic raw diet. She says, oh, no, that's no good. They could get this and this and this from it. I said, no, they can't. And we switch vets because that's horrible that they say that. And Jeffrey, you know, I was a very sickly kid. In my early 20s, I was so tired of being sick. And I read The Poisons in Your Food by Longgood, and I read Silent Spring, and I knew that they were right. So that was 58 years ago. I just turned 80, And
Wow.
yeah,
Congratulations. My goodness.
yeah,
I
so
don't see you
excited.
as an 80-year-old. That's amazing.
I know. So I've been eating organic, non-processed foods for 58 years. I'm the only one I know. I've never had a McDonald's hamburger. I've never eaten any of that stuff. I don't eat fast food. I don't eat packaged food. So even when the GMOs came, I wasn't having them because I was still buying all fresh organics and eating that way all this time. And so, now at 80, I get to say, look,
It
you know,
worked.
I don't have any of these diseases. I don't have arthritis. I have high energy. I've got, no illness. My mind is clear. This is why. I mean, I also sleep well. I do my inner work. I do my spiritual work. I exercise. I mean, it's not just one thing. I've also discovered that, you got to be taking loving care of yourself in all ways, physically and emotionally and spiritually. But boy, these GMOs and the pesticides and the additives and the devitalized food, it's just so awful. And that's why I'm so excited to be interviewing you and showing this to everybody that I work with.
Thank you. And it's interesting when you think about the fact that you have such great vitality and energy and health. People may think, well, could it really be the GMOs? Think about this. The average American eats more than their weight each year in GMOs. And GMOs themselves, they have been linked to all sorts of dangers and health. We can go into that detail. But an easier thing to relate to, even though the GMOs themselves are dangerous, an easier thing to relate to is the Roundup herbicide sprayed on the Roundup ready crops. That was a big culprit described in the movie Secret Ingredients. Right. And I didn't put it this way in the film, but here's basically the summary. If you look at the fundamental building blocks of health, there's just a few of them. And all of them are damaged or seriously altered as a result of Roundup herbicide in our food.
That's right.
It prevents or it gets in the way of absorbing minerals. That leads to a long list of diseases. Right. It's an antibiotic that kills the beneficial bacteria. Well, imbalances in the microbiome are the basis of most diseases. It creates inflammation and leaky gut, the basis of most diseases. It damages the mitochondria, the basis of so many diseases. It can interfere with the neurotransmitters, serotonin, melatonin, dopamine. Now you can understand the stress, the anxiety, the depression, the sleep disorders, the chronic pain.
That's right.
And then it also can mess up hormones. It can cause mutations in the DNA. It can lead to cancer, birth defects, damages to the intestines, damage to even the ability to digest food. Each of these things are fundamental, and you put them all together, and it's a recipe for disaster. Now, what we know is it's not just sprayed on GMOs. Roundup is sprayed on the grains and beans. It's found high concentrations in navy beans, hummus, oats. So it's imperative that people not just eat non-GMO, they need to eat organic.
Organic.
Yeah.
But it's the clothing too. Like the cotton is sprayed and all these synthetics. I don't buy anything anymore that's not organic, and fair trade, because you're putting it on your body and it's getting absorbed in there.
And they found, obviously if you have cotton that's not organic, you want to wash it before you wear it. They found that some things, however, made of cotton, you don't wash first, like feminine hygiene tampons. They found glyphosate levels in the tampons. That's something you don't want to expose to the mucous membranes of your body that can be absorbed and cause all these problems and hormonal changes and whatnot. It's also found in bandages and on diapers. So eating organic and buying organic is pretty critical. It's pretty critical in so many of these areas.
And it will change if people do it. I mean, we have the power by by what we buy to change this huge food industry and big pharma and all of that. We have the power to change it.
Fortunately, it's already changing. Like, if you think about the mathematics of it, you don't need 51% of the consumers buying non-GMO to change the market. Imagine that you sold cookies. Let's say you're Nabisco or Nestle's or whatever, and you sell cookies, and they're not organic and they contain GMOs. Then someone on the same shelf describes their product as non-GMO, and they start to increase market share.
Right.
It doesn't need to be increased market share by 10 or 15 or 20% in order for the GMO cookie to realize, oh my God, I'm losing market share just by using ingredients that give me no advantage. So
Right.
the owner of that GMO cookie is now eliminating or has already eliminated GMO ingredients so that they are not losing market share, or in some cases, so they're trying to gain market share because their competitors haven't yet declared non-GMO. All it takes is a small percentage, and guess what? We have that percentage in the marketplace now. 46% of Americans say they're seeking non-GMO. It's more than we need. The tipping point is underway. Now, that's the tipping point for GMOs.
Yeah.
But a lot of people think incorrectly that if they have to choose between organic and non-GMO, they choose non-GMO. It should be the other way. Organic is more important, and the two together are the best. Now, why is that?
Organic isn't GMO, so if you choose organic, you're not going to get GMO.
There's one advantage to have an organic and a non-GMO project verified seal. The non-GMO project does require testing to see if GMO contamination has occurred if the product has one of the GMO products like soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa, zucchini,
Right.
yellow squash, papaya, apple or potato, or salmon. So it'll actually measure to see whether there's contamination that's occurred, and if it has to be below a certain level on a consistent basis. Organic does not allow the intentional use of GMOs, but doesn't require testing. So if you put the two together on the same package and they have both third-party verifications, now you know it's not sprayed with Roundup, it's not allowed to be organic, and the non-GMO project has required testing if there are at-risk ingredients. So that's the gold standard. If you can't get that, at least get organic. And if you can't get that, well, then at least get non-GMO and avoid the grains and beans while you're eating out that might be sprayed. There's other things that have Roundup on it too. It's in a lot of things. It's in wine and beer and orange juice.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so many people say, yeah, but I can't afford it. And what I say to them is, first of all, being sick costs a lot of money.
A lot more than the food, yeah.
Way more than you're going to spend on food. And they sell it at Costco, and they sell it at farmers markets. There are so many ways of buying good food without having to spend a lot. And people eat way too much. They don't need so much food. So if they cut down on what they eat and they get the good food, they're going to do so much better. Money is not really an excuse for this.
When there's high nutrient density in the food, then the body doesn't stay starved.
Right.
So you actually get full more quickly. When
Right.
you're eating Roundup laden foods, the foods themselves have deficient minerals, and then the Roundup further makes it deficient because it'll bind with the minerals. It's a chelator. It binds with the minerals, making them unavailable. So you're stuffed and starved. You continue to eat empty calories. So you actually will eat less, or some people often report, I can't say someone specifically listening will definitely eat less, but that's the case often. And for some reason, and that it may not just be that reason, but the third most commonly reported benefit from those that took our survey of the 3,256 people was relief from being obese or overweight. Now,
Yeah.
I think it's not just the fact that you're eating less. I think that the ability to digest, the ability for the healthy conversion of food becomes intact. And so many people, more than 50% of the people in that survey reported relief from obesity or overweight. And I hear it all the time.
Oh, yeah. But, and of course, people have been fed, don't eat high fat, and they don't realize the difference between the industrial seed oils, which are all full of toxins, and the natural fats that people have been eating for thousands of years, that normalizes the body's metabolism, as well as, what I say to people is, look, eat the way people ate a few hundred years ago, before refrigerators, before markets. They fermented their foods because they didn't have refrigerators. Mm-hmm. And so that's how they kept them fresh. That's how they ate all winter, is they fermented their foods. And they had fermented foods with every single meal. They fermented ketchup and mayonnaise and all kinds of things, which is what I do. I make sure that I have fermented foods with every single meal. Near me, and people can find these things if they look online, but near me there's a farm that sells the organic raw milk. I get it every week. I make yogurt, I make kefir, I drip it because I like it thick, and that's kept my microbiome. I make sauerkraut, I make all kinds of fermented fruits and vegetables, and I have it with every meal. And I know that's a huge reason why I'm so healthy, that's so important.
The cows that were having problems and had high levels of glyphosate in their urine, there was a peer-reviewed study that showed that sauerkraut juice and humic acid for the minerals helped revive and turn that around. I did a online conference called Healing from GMOs and Roundup, and we interviewed 18 physicians and others, experts, people who develop products to help reverse the detox, repair, and rebuild the body. And the microbiome came up all the time,
right,
as critical. And we had people teaching, selling, they invented a cap for mason jars that makes it easy to ferment, and people talked about why that's so important. And more recently, I talked to Kiran Krishnan, who's an expert at the microbiome and probiotics and prebiotics, and he took a fake gut that was in Europe that's a state-of-the-art gut. It has all the different chambers that correspond to the different parts of the human gut. And he inoculated with a human microbiome from a 3-year-old who had always eaten organic, never was vaccinated, never took antibiotics, and then fed that gut with food for 3 weeks, and then fed that with Roundup for 3 weeks. And then what happened was the changes in the microbiome were so significant that when I went through a list of 30 different diseases with him, he said that each one of those diseases, he went through each one and told me why the specific changes in the gut bacteria could lead to those diseases.
Yeah.
So the microbiome, for those that may not be aware, it not only detoxes, it's part of the immune system and it's part of the digestive system. It also maintains the integrity of the gut lining. Right. So if there's leaky gut, that's related to a lot of inflammation and food sensitivities, etc. And we know that when you put human cells that have those tight junctions in a petri dish, and you add glyphosate, which is the chief poison in Roundup, they'll come apart.
Yeah.
And so
and the people, so many people I work with are depressed, and I say, look, if you're good, then that toxicity from that bad bacteria is going right up the vagus nerve into your brain, causing anxiety and depression. I can work with you psychotherapeutically for ages, but if you're not going to fix your gut, you're likely still going to be anxious and depressed from all of that toxicity. And I've seen amazing things with people who come to me with years of clinical depression and all kinds of drugs that they've taken, which of course all drugs have a bad effect on the microbiome. And then, I say, how are you eating? They say, oh, I have a good diet. They never do. They do not understand what a good diet is. And those who are willing to change it, within a couple months, their depression's gone, their anxiety's gone. It's really amazing.
I love to hear that. I absolutely love to hear that. And I can tell you some of the mechanics here. There's 2 ways that Roundup might be interfering with serotonin. Serotonin obviously is one of the happy chemicals. One is that Monsanto has bragged for years that glyphosate, the chief poison in Roundup, doesn't hurt humans because what it does is it blocks the shikimate pathway, which is found in plants, but not humans. Well, Roundup does a lot of things other than the shikimate pathway that they've ignored. In fact, we now know from the millions of documents made public from these Roundup lawsuits where Monsanto lost that, in fact, they were aware of a lot of problems and been rigging their research and suppressing evidence for a long time. But they also ignored the fact that the gut bacteria uses the shikimate pathway to produce the building blocks of serotonin, melatonin, and dopamine. So if it gets blocked, then we may not have enough of the L-tryptophan, for example, to produce the serotonin, or the tyrosine to produce the dopamine. And most of the serotonin in the body is produced in the gut. The other thing is that serotonin, a lot of the cells along the gut walls produce serotonin, but in conjunction with the gut bacteria. Yeah. They've taken certain animal models, and they've eliminated the gut bacteria, and they're no longer producing the serotonin. So if you damage the gut bacteria, and what happens with Roundup is that it kills the beneficial bacteria. So it's a unique antibiotic. It's patented as an antibiotic, but it's unique because it's not like this carpet bombing of all the different strains. It selectively kills the beneficials, and that also might not only create problems with detoxification, with immune system and digestion, it could also possibly dismantle the ability of these hormonal cells to create serotonin. So now you have someone who's deprived of serotonin, that leads to one level of depression, or maybe dopamine, that leads to another level of depression. And it's simply, and people are feeling they need to go and get all sorts of other things. And it's no, just change the diet and see what happens.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but every single mass shooter has been on those psychotropic drugs for anxiety and depression. Every single one. And so probably what happens is they're eating really badly, then they get depressed, then they go to a psychiatrist who doesn't know what to do, gives them an antidepressant which further destroys their gut and creates, those antidepressants. They don't let you know that, but they're homicidal and suicidal in some people. So the fact that every single mass shooter has been on these drugs, that's very, very important information.
That's pretty shocking.
Yeah, that is shocking.
And they're probably all eating glyphosate laden.
Oh, I'm sure they are. I'm sure that's why they're depressed to begin with, is because they're eating all that. The body can't handle all that. There's no way. I don't understand why people don't understand that the body cannot handle that. It's going to get sick. The other thing that I heard just today is that a lot of young girls, like 8 years old, are getting ovarian cancer.
Wow.
That is so upsetting. And I know it's from the GMOs, it's the pesticides, it's the devitalized food, it's all of it. It's the onslaught, that's happening to the bodies, and they can't handle it.
So this is big news to me. I have not heard that. I do know that there are several cancers that rise in parallel with the increased use of Roundup sprayed on GMO soy and corn. That would be kidney, bladder, liver, deaths from leukemia. There's a correlation with breast cancer. And the Institute for the IATP, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, they are a part of the World Health Organization, and they declared that glyphosate causes cancer in animals. It is a probable human carcinogen, but there weren't enough studies on humans to make it definite. Where it is sprayed in large amounts, there's higher levels of cancer in the population, and that it causes oxidative stress and genotoxicity, which lead to cancer. And so that's allowed for these non-Hodgkin's lymphoma lawsuits that, have won so far 3 out of 3 with very high monetary awards by the juries. And it's certainly possible that ovarian cancer is one that's affected by glyphosate. We don't know. There has to be more studies, but cancer in general, because of genotoxicity, causing mutations in the DNA and also promoting tumors growth, because it was found in the research that if there are already tumors in the body, it will promote the growth. So there was a study that was done with, it was mice, I believe, and they put Roundup on the skin. They shaved the mice, put it on the skin, and 40% got tumors, and the control groups, it was 0. There was another study where they took Roundup-ready corn that was sprayed with Roundup and fed it to rats over 2 years, and they ended up with massive tumors. And then they decided, well, is it the Roundup or is it the corn? So they had 2 other experimental groups. One was just fed the corn that had never been sprayed with Roundup. Another was fed the Roundup without the corn. They also got multiple massive tumors. Now, it was interesting that the control group, by comparison, had very few tumors, maybe 10% compared to 80 or 90%. Yeah. But the biotech industry said, we see a problem because your control group does not have as many tumors as it should. Because in our research, the control group has 70 or 80%. And so we're not going to compare your experimental group with your control. we're going to compare your experimental group with historical controls and say there's no statistical significance because our control groups have higher levels of cancer. But the researchers decided to test the rat chow and the mice chow that are used around the world, and those control groups are eating GMOs and Roundup, which means that when you do studies on GMOs and Roundup, they feed the animal GMOs and Roundup, and then they feed the control group GMOs and Roundup and compare them. So
yeah, and so often these experiments, and they'll come out with stuff, and I say, but they didn't do it on organic, non-GMO food.
Right.
So it doesn't mean anything what they're saying because they're not doing the research properly.
Exactly. Exactly. And not only that, but they have some pretty unique ways of rigging the research, and I have investigated that for many years. In fact, it's part of my book called Genetic Roulette, where I catch them red-handed. And during the trial, I've been following these red-handed, these rigging research things very closely because I love finding how they do it and exposing it. But there was a new one that came out that I absolutely love. It's how blatant Monsanto was when they wanted to show that the Roundup did not get absorbed enough into the skin. So they put it on cadaver skin, dead body skin, and found that 10% absorbed into the skin, which is more than 3 times the allowable level. So they didn't ever report that to the EPA, or Roundup would never be allowed to be introduced. The reason why it gets absorbed is because they have something that drives it into the plant tissue, and that also drives it into the skin in many different ways. It emulsifies it, it causes irritation, it opens up the pores. And so what they did, this is just such vintage Monsanto. They took cadaver skin, cut it out, and put it in an oven and baked it. And after they baked it and it got really hard, then they froze it and it got even harder. And then they applied Roundup, and lo and behold, it had hardly any absorption. And so they reported the absorption in that baked and frozen skin as the results of their study. Complete fraud. Another thing, the original study, which they said proved that glyphosate was not a carcinogen, was done by a test laboratory, IBT, which was declared a fraud, and it was described by papers as the single largest scientific fraud in US history and possibly in the world. They completely rigged their research on behalf of the entire chemical and drug industry. They were handling 30% of all the toxicological studies. They were being submitted to the regulatory authorities, and they were lying. They were cutting and pasting results from one. They were doing 2-year studies in 9 months. If an animal died during the experiment, they just replaced it. And it was interesting that the study that cleared Monsanto's Roundup was done by them, and there were 3 people that actually went to jail from this laboratory. And one had worked at Monsanto, and when they submitted their research, he then worked at IBT, and then when that was done, he went back to Monsanto, and then he was sent to jail. So this is the kind of research that we're seeing from Monsanto, which has been purchased by Bayer, which is now dealing with the brunt of those lawsuits, and their market value has dropped by 50%. Because they realized there's 30,000 people waiting for their day in court, and 3 people had about $250 million already given to them by the judge. Even if the judge lowered the rates to $250 million, if they hadn't, then the total that they would have to pay would be well over $2 billion.
Yeah. I mean, it's so sad. The whole thing is so sad because it's all about money. It's all about greed. These people have no conscience whatsoever regarding the effect that they're having on health, physical, emotional, mental health, and look at the health care in our country. I mean, it's skyrocketed. I mean, we can't call it health care. That it's just dealing with illness, and it's going to break this country if they don't deal with it. People have to start to take responsibility for their health. They have to start to read. They have to start to see what happens to their body when they eat these foods. And to me, it's so simple. I mean, people know this about horses. When they raise horses, they give them really excellent food. They don't give them the junk because they won't be able to run. And so they know it about that. But for some reason, they say, oh, well, you know, it can't be having that big an effect. Well, of course it does. How can they not know that?
Right.
And the thing that I work with people on is teaching them how to really see and value and love themselves, because once they see who they are, then they want to take care of themselves. Then they're motivated to eat well. But if they don't like themselves, if they don't value themselves, they don't care how they treat themselves. And that's a huge problem.
And I want to say that from this conversation, someone may think, you know, I really need to change my diet. I would say for most, there might be an intermediary stage, and that is to watch the film Secret Ingredients.
Yeah.
Because that we've done pre and post test evaluations of viewers, and like the percentage of their diet that's been organic compared to what they plan to eat after watching it is dramatically changed.
I'm sure.
And it's because you see in front of you the people's changing their lives. And
Right.
so I want to actually encourage people to do two things. Not only watch the film, but go to secretingredientsmovie.com and sign up to show it. Get a little showing license where you can show it for the rest of your life to any size group, and then you can be able to introduce it to your community. And when you introduce your community, these people will get better from all these different problems, and they'll have you to thank because you've taken initiative. And we have a whole support program that can support you with posters and press releases and postcards and things like that to help you get the word out, and how to run a discussion afterwards. In fact, we like to recommend that when groups watch it, that they get together after that monthly to do a organic potluck. And we can provide information to that potluck. You can play videos that we can provide. We have activism you can do to try and, let's say, get rid of Roundup spraying in your community. But that's further down the road. I think seeing it yourself and becoming convinced, and then if you have a little extra energy, share it with the people you love, and then share it with the community.
Yeah, I just love the film, Jeffrey. I think you did such a fabulous job. And that's why I'm so excited to be interviewing you and sharing this with as many people as I can. Because, I mean, obviously this has been very dear to my heart for so many years. And it's just so heartbreaking to see what's happening with so many people. I have clients that are young, that have breast cancer. And I say, how have you been eating? And of course they've been eating sugar and processed foods and GMO foods. And they know I've been talking about this for a long time. And I just hope that if they watch secretingredients.com, they're going to recognize how really, really important this is.
Absolutely. So you can even watch the trailer at secretingredientsmovie.com. You can watch the whole thing on iTunes and Google Play. And the reason why Amy Hart and I created the film was for the impact, to actually change the individuals. But as an activist, I've spoken in 45 countries. I've worked in this for 23 years and given 1,000 lectures and 1,000 interviews. I'm about the planet. I'm about making a big change for the planet. Right. And speaking of which, we're now at the Institute for Responsible Technology, which is the nonprofit that I founded. You can go to responsibletechnology.org. We have another program that we're launching to protect the planet from widespread introduction of gene-edited GMOs. They're cheap, they're easy to do, and the Trump administration signed an executive order to try and dismantle any of the regulatory requirements around the world to convince the rest of the world to accept American-made gene-edited GMOs. They want to genetically engineer bacteria, bees, fungus, fish, algae, animals, everything with DNA. And once you release it into the environment, it will pollute the gene pool. It'll corrupt the gene pool, because that's what it does to the individual DNA. It causes massive collateral damage. That becomes part of the species gene pool. That gets inherited. It's irreversible. And the number one most common result of genetic engineering is surprise side effects. So instead of passing on to the next generation the products of the billions of years of evolution, we'll be passing on designer genes with designer organisms designed for greater profit and control, and completely packed with mutations and deletions and additions that in many cases have never even been seen or evaluated, that are causing massive problems in the ecosystem And if you add them all up, the chances of a cataclysm become almost 100%. So this becomes an existential threat on the level of whatever you want to say, global climate change, death to the oceans, nuclear catastrophe. It's on that level. And
Right.
please go to responsibletechnology.org to learn more about that as well.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. This has to turn around.
Yes, and we will turn it around. We did this we started the tipping point. We pioneered the messaging there for the tipping point by sharing the health dangers of GMOs and Roundup with people. That started that. We're educating people about the dangers. We have a 3-minute video about this planetary issue, and we're moving forward. So I have a lot of confidence, but we need to do more than just hear it for ourselves. We need to think of all living beings, all future generations, and then pass it on.
Jeffrey, I am so grateful to you for the work that you're doing for the whole planet. You know, my heart is filled with love for you that you're so devoted to helping the whole planet in this way. And thank you so much for doing this interview with me. I just can't wait to show it to as many people as I can.
And thank you for reaching out to me and letting me know that you wanted to figure out a way to get this to everyone, because you have the psychology of that when you hear something that's important, you want to share it with others. And I have that same thing. So we have that camaraderie, we have that same characteristic, and I'm really hoping that we can inspire that same message, that same motivation in the people now, so that it's not just to protect them and their life, but we can all act as emissaries of this good information and protect the planet.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and safe eating.
Mm-hmm.